Great. Hi, I'm Jodi Hammer, and I work with the NPCA, National Peace Corps Association's Global Reentry Program, which is a brand new program that is designed to support you, the RPCVs, the evacuees, many of whom, are accessing our services obviously right now, as well as other RPCVs. So I'm really excited to be here and to have my colleague Ariana with me. Ariana, would you like to briefly just introduce yourself from NPCA as well, and just confirm that I think you are starting the recording, or it's already started, correct?
Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem.
We've started the recording, so we're good to go.
Great.
Everybody, I'm Ari. I'm the Community Engagement Associate with NPCA, and I served in Swaziland, now known as Eswatini, from 2017 to 2019. So I'm still fairly new back myself. And I'll be monitoring the chat for any questions you may have throughout this presentation.
Great, wonderful. Ari, thank you so much for your help. That's very, very helpful to have somebody on the chat box while I'm doing the screen share and such. And we look forward to talking a little bit about interviewing, sharing some information, but really spending as much time as possible answering your questions. So, of course, the topic of interviewing is such a huge topic. I could literally spend hours talking and discussing and answering questions. So this is just the first of. We'll definitely do some more and probably break down some of the aspects of interviewing for future webinars. But I do want to greet, there's several people that did just join as well. Thank you so much. I do want to say one more thing about myself. I also am an RPCV, having served in Ecuador from 94 through 97. And before this job, some of you might recognize my name from, I worked about 12 years with the Peace Corps headquarters, running their RPCV Career Center. And I'm just thrilled to have been brought on board here with NPCA as part of their global reentry program, where I'm able to do the same thing that I love to do, which is talk to people about the job search and resumes and all those fun things. To me, I know it's much more stressful when you're in the midst of it and doing it, but I love working in this area. And of course, RPCVs are my population of preference. I mean, very near and dear to my heart, of course, due to my own status and just you're great people. RPCVs are awesome, and they take the ball and run with it when you work with them and suggestions and such. I couldn't be happier in my role. So thank you so much for tuning in today to this session, and I hope that you'll learn some things and be able to share some things as well. A little bit about the technicalities of how this will work, the technical aspects. We will be using the chat box primarily to communicate with participants, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat box. Know that we will be answering them throughout. I'm not going to buzz through the whole presentation and talk that whole time and then get to the end and answer your questions. I really want to filter it so that your questions can come in at the appropriate time and whenever it makes most sense. So Ari's going to really be helping me in the background bring out those questions when we get to maybe the right point. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I will also try to open it up and have it in the, very minimized to be able to help in that as well. So excited about that. We may at some point, depending on how many people we have currently, I think, over 40, but this is the second session we've done of this. So we had more folks that participated last time as well. If it allows later on, I love to allow people to be able to maybe unmute and ask their question or anything like that, share comments. So we'll see if we can make that work as well. But regardless, you do have the chat box, and the chat will be, you can actually download the chat too. So that's another important thing. I understand you may have to drop off at any time. Before you do so, I would encourage you to do the quick, just go to the participant panel, and on the very bottom, there'll be the 3 dots. And when you click on that, I think it's the first option, it'll say save chat, and you can save it that way. Super easy. And that way you can go back, because we may be dropping some resources and such in there as well that we oftentimes use. And I'll be following up with an email that will contain the link to this video, as well as lots of resources in addition, and resources we've pulled from and what we've talked about here today. So let's go ahead and get started. I do have a slide on the Global Reentry Program just to make sure folks know what it is. We are really here to serve you, right? We were founded to meet the needs of transitioning volunteers. We were actually already being formed before COVID-19 happened, and then wow, that happened with the global evacuation, which really sped things up. And so we're thrilled to be able to help in that capacity as well. You all deserve the help, and we really empathize with what you're going through, what you have gone through, and we know that you're super resilient, and with some tips and advice and your fortitude and resiliency and all of those great skills that you have, you will be fine, you will be okay, and you will find your next steps. So I'm happy to be a part of that however I can be. The first pillar within global reentry is really the career one, and that's the one that I'm really leading, if you will. I'm the one who's going to be doing the career workshops and our special events and things like that. So I'm at least dedicated almost fully to that one. However, we do have the education, which I'll be involved in to some degree as well, with graduate programs, helping to connect you with graduate programs as well, many of whom, by the way, whether or not you know, have reopened their applications, their deadlines. They've removed the deadlines or put them back, and are allowing, because they want to reach out to the RPCVs. They know how talented you are and what great candidates you are. And many of them, some of them are even offering, you know, these full scholarships, or really good scholarships, as long as you qualify for the program. So urge you to consider those if graduate school is in your immediate plans. Or whenever it is. So the third pillar is really well-being, which is absolutely a crucial one as well. Helping support the volunteers at this difficult time, you know, sharing tips and resources, emotional support. Some of the affiliate groups, I think the New York one did an excellent session that I think was recorded on, you know, mental health and emotional well-being, you know, at this difficult time, because it's a really tough time. So things that can maybe help you get through in that regard as well. And then the fourth pillar is really our concept of, you know, we all know COS, close of service, right, as close of service, but we'd like to really change that to be more of a continuation of service. I guess I look at my own Peace Corps service and the RPCVs that I've worked with over the years. It's not like you get back from Peace Corps and suddenly you don't serve anyone anymore, you don't help anymore. It tends to be more of a fuel. It fuels the fire and gets you maybe even more committed to do things in your own community or on a, you know, national or international level, a lifetime of service, you know, whether that's full-time or things that you do on the side. So we want to also help in that regard, because that is important. Okay, great. So let's dive in without any further ado to interviewing, because we do have a lot to cover. I will try not to speak too fast, but please let me know if I'm going too fast. I can certainly slow down, but also realize that you will have access to this recording, and the recording will, you can, you know, go back and watch things. So don't worry about taking, you know, copious notes throughout the presentation. Just try to focus on what we're saying, ask the questions you have, and you can always go back. Okay, so alrighty, the purpose of an interview. We're going to talk briefly about the purpose of an interview, and then the different types of interviews that are out there. There's so many different types, right? But an interview, I just want to make the point, interviewing is, yes, the employer's way of really testing, you know, you or verifying that you're as good in person, or nowadays virtually, right, as you are on paper. You know, they might be impressed by your background and experiences, but the actual interview tells them more, allows them to kind of get a better idea of, are you being truthful there? You know, can you come up with examples that prove what you've said in your resume? Things like that. So it is crucial for an employer. I mean, hiring somebody is a very expensive endeavor. It's much better to get the right fit from the start than to you know, hire somebody, have them decide it's not the right fit, they leave in 2 months, and there you are again, having to go all the way back to ground, you know, zero, and start again with the interview process. It's also important to see their kind of, what are they like? What's their, you know, personality or their temperament? Will they fit with the team? Those are all really good things as well. So if you have questions maybe about their resume, or there's things that are you don't see and you want to know more about it, an interview allows that. But I always caution, or not caution, I always try to help RPCV clients realize that it's also your opportunity to learn more about the organization, the people you'd be working with, the job, the nature of the job, to gain a better view of whether or not it would be something that you would enjoy. And I don't know about you. My question, you know, would be, how many of you have you know, gone to an interview, or, you know, and you leave that interview thinking, oh no, that is so not the right fit. You know, where you just know it, you feel it, your gut. right? That has been, the case for most people, maybe at least once, right? So it's really good for you, the interviewee, to get a better perspective before you make that big decision and commit to leaving maybe a job that you have, or taking a new job, that you might not want to leave right away. So it is very important for everyone. So let's go ahead. And I have a graphic here about the types of interviews, right? There's many different types of interviews. I like this graphic because it shows everything from, your phone interview, right? Phone interviews are oftentimes the interviews that are done right up front. Oftentimes it's more like a screening assessment, right? They can be very short, but oftentimes they're under 15 minutes. They might even be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And many times the employer, whoever's calling, it's usually an HR professional, who's calling to ask you a few central questions like, can you please verify your number of years of experience in XYZ? Can you, do you have a master's in this, or whatever it is? They're basically verifying the requirements, because people can say anything in an application. I would never advise you to lie, because it doesn't serve you well. In the long run, it generally would come back or could come back to bite you. So, but they want to make sure that they're not going to waste the time of the senior level executives or whoever's on the hiring or interviewing committee. The last thing they want to do is bring someone in only to find you don't even have what we were looking for. How did you make it through to the interview round? So the phone screen can be really important for that. It can also be, sometimes a phone interview is what's done as the full interview, and it's a long interview, right? Some people, I've heard people who've said, I used to ask in my old job, would you rather have a phone or an in-person, or a virtual or an in-person interview, like on the phone or an in-person? And see people like, oh, on the phone, I can have my notes in front of me. I can be all set. I don't have to worry about eye contact. And that's great. There are some advantages of a phone interview. But in my mind, the problem with a phone interview is it's much harder to connect with the person. You don't have that eye contact, which is so important, right? You can't read their body language of when you may or may not be straying from maybe what they want to hear. So there's so many reasons why I think the in-person or virtual, something where you can see the person's face and such, right, can be, I think, more helpful. So I would encourage you, if you ever are given a choice between the two, I would pick the in-person or virtual if they didn't have the in-person available, as right now we don't. So your more traditional interview would have, your more traditional interview of like the one-on-one, you might have where it's or a 1-on-3 or whatever. It might be a small panel, which is another type that's shown here. But your traditional one-on-one, that's where you're going to be having a conversation with one person, right? And you're going to be proving what the skills that you have. They'll be asking you set questions. It could be a very formalized, scripted type of, like, they have a set list of questions they have to ask. Federal government, they're very mandated to ask the same questions of everyone. So other times it's a very informal, unstructured one where you might have the manager that meets you, and there's virtually no structure other than tell me about yourself and your background. Oh, what have you been? It's very informal, and that's more assessing your ability to connect interpersonally, without that kind of scripted or not scripted, but the planned responses types of things. So panel interviews, of course, you have to more than one, right? More than one person in them. I am someone who prefers a panel interview over a one-on-one, and that's because of the eye contact. With one person, they always talk about how important eye contact is, and yet it's really intimidating, right? You don't want to just stare at somebody. So there's that fine line between enough eye contact and not staring at somebody, which becomes uncomfortable, and you don't break that that stare. That's not good either, right? So with a panel, you have more people that you can break up you can give most of your eye contact to the person who asked you the question, but you definitely want to scan to the other folks. And every time you have a break between that one person's eye contact and the next person's, that's blissful, right? It's like your break for your eye contact. So it's a lot easier, I think. It also gives you the opportunity to connect with people more. Like, let's say, in a panel, the more people that are on a panel, the more likely one of them is going to connect with you on whatever level and, like what you had to say. So I think it's a great, I like the panel interview, and I would encourage you to try not to be intimidated by it with more people looking at you, but rather treat it as that conversation and spread your eye contact out. So the video, like we said, you know, the video one, it could be via Zoom, it could be a video conference. Sometimes people will do a video taped interview where they have a set number of questions and you have to respond to those in a video, and you record your response and then, you know, turn it in. That one to me is it's much less personal, right? You know, but sometimes that's the way it is, right? But more common would be today, of course, with COVID-19 and such. Video interviews are the only type that's really taking place right now, or most of the time, right? Group interviews, you know, they might have, with group interviews, they might bring in a number of candidates at the same time. So it's you with other candidates kind of competing, if you will, or answering questions, but it's, you know, they're with you. So that's a little more like competition, if you will, but it can also give you ideas of like how other people are answering the questions and, you know, things like that. So it can be an interesting format as well. The strengths-based or technical interview, you can have, oftentimes they might, you know, my background is training and development, right? And career, you know, coaching and such. So oftentimes in past jobs, they've asked me to do some type of, you know, for my second interview. It's usually as a second interview, but sometimes it's as part of the first interview. They'll have you come in and do a training, design and implement a 20-minute or 30-minute training on communication styles for blah, blah. And so you do that. So it's you getting up in front of them and actually sharing what you put together, your skills, your experience, your curriculum, that kind of thing. And that can be common. It's not always, but it certainly can be. And then the lunch or dinner, you're going, you know, out. The one thing I want to say about that is take the lead of the people that you're dining with, that you're out with. But I wouldn't, the one exception to that would be, I would personally not encourage you to order alcohol, even if they order alcohol. I just think the most professional thing to do, and to keep you on your toes and really in the best frame of mind for answering questions and such, is to avoid that. And then informational interviews is a whole different topic, but that's more if you're, you know, a career chat. I've talked about that in some of my past webinars, and we'll dive in deeper to that at a future date as well. But that's totally different than your like job interviewing, right? It might be, that's very important though, because it can be what leads you to getting an interview, right? You might have that career chat or informational interview with somebody, you know, that you meet through a contact, or you find them through LinkedIn and you ask if they might have 15-20 minutes of their time, you know, to chat about their own experience, you know, to somebody who's interested in the field. So that's more of one that's initiated by you. So it's quite different, but you know, it is definitely one of the types of interviews. And then lastly, behavioral ones. And those, we're going to talk more about that. Actually, I'm going to leave that one, other than just say, you know, these are the ones where you're going to be proving, giving an example of a time. They're questions that can't be answered with that yes, no, right answer. It's going to be, tell me about a time you, and fill in the blank. And we'll talk about more about those and how to actually respond to those in the most effective way. So let's go on. You know, as I mentioned, today's reality, I mean, it's the virtual interviewing. And it's hard in some ways. Virtual interviewing is difficult because you have, you know, sometimes technical issues, which hopefully we won't have any today here, but it's just a reality that you might. So you want to prepare for those. The tip that I have on that is really prepare for those technical difficulties. Make sure you have the meeting ID number and the password or whatever written down separately from your computer in case things crash. Maybe even ask the employer, you know, great, I'm looking forward to this, virtual interview. Is there a phone number that I should have in case of emergency or technical, you know, issues? So that just shows you as somebody who's really prepared and looking at, you know, trying to be ahead in that regard, which I think is good. Make sure, the biggest tip I have for this, I mean, we've all seen, right, on Facebook and wherever else, that you know, it's the distractions. Make sure that your background is, you know, either a muted or pretty. It's one that's not going to be too disruptive. Maybe it's not going to be, you're not going to be interfered. You're not going to have, you know, the dog come and be in the background or bark. So you want to make sure you take into consideration that background noise possibilities to reduce those or eliminate them, right? Making sure that nobody appears in the background, photobombing on accident, you know, walking through. I have a 7-year-old child, so I am sensitive to this one, certainly, and do my tapings and such here in my basement. So it's out of the way. I'm alone down here. So make sure you can put yourself in an area where you're going to be alone. Be careful of some of the backgrounds, because I have found from my experience, for example, with my background here, which is for me, it's a happy place for me, or a happy memory. It's from Ecuador, where I served. It's one of my big tapestries that I just have as my background. But what you don't want, I've tried to use some of the ones where you just activate the background. There's the one of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, and there's the one that's the space. They will not work with my background when there's a lot of stuff going on. They recommend you have a green screen or a green background or plain background in order to be able to have one of those pictures work. You don't want to be in an interview virtually and have your face, part of your head is disappearing, and coming back and forth, or is hidden in the grass. So you want to test those beforehand. Test your virtual camera, and you can easily do that by going onto a Zoom of your own and then putting those on and see if they work. The advantage of them, of course, is that if they work and they don't cut off parts of your body, it's more of a stable, background, which is nice as well. Eye contact is key even with a virtual session. And I know it's hard, but here's what I suggest. Put a little sticky or something. I used to do this, put right by my camera, which, your camera's in wherever it is, right? If you're using a laptop, on the top, right next to that, I would put a smiley face just to remind me to smile. Not that I'm going to smile the entire time, but I tend to get very wrapped up and intent on what I'm saying, and it becomes, my expression can become very intense. So it's best if I remember to smile, and just, even if it's with my eyes, and to be looking at the camera and not at your screen. Because right now, if I look at, people, here on the screen to the camera and to them, I'm looking down. If you have them on the screen and you're making eye contact with their picture or their live, eyes, virtual eyes, you're not looking at them on the camera. So I know that's really hard because it's natural to look at yourself or the other people, but really try to focus on that camera and put something, maybe an arrow, pointing, an arrow right by the camera, a big red arrow that's on a sticky or something, so that you give the camera better eye contact. That is really important. Okay. And then, I think we've covered this here. So let's go on. Preparing for the interview. So advanced preparation is really key with interviewing, right? You don't want to just get that call and say, oh, great, I'll come in or whatever, and not do any preparation for it, because you want to shine in this, right? Chances are you're putting other applications in as well. So you want to go back and actually review the job description, which, by the way, will not always be online active anymore. So it's really important that you always download the job application when it's there. Copy it into a Word document and put it in your job search file, right? Under whatever the name of the title of the job, or however you're formatting, however you're organizing. I'll leave that to you. But keep that so that you can go back, because it's not very impressive when somebody calls and says, we would love to, interview you for this project manager position with Care International, blah, blah, blah. And for you to say, oh, that's great. Do you have a copy of the job description? That just doesn't make you sound that prepared and such. So definitely do that. And then research the organization and the staff. You can do a lot online these days. Many organizations on their website, they have our team, and they'll have the introductions of the people. Try to find out, when they call and offer you the interview, there's no harm in asking them, and saying, great, I'm really excited about this interview, and it sounds wonderful. Can you tell me by chance who will be participating in the interview, and what the format, or how long I should plan for, or what the format is? You might be able to get some information on whether it's a panel or a one-on-one or whatever. So that can be good as well. And then you really, when you're looking at, same as when you did when you wrote your cover letter and your resume, you had to highlight, right? You highlighted those key skills they were looking for, right? And then you put those into your resume. Go back to that job announcement, read it, and then start to create your stories. These are true factual stories about how you meet those skills, what your experience is that proves those different skills. That's super important. I'm going to talk more in a little bit about how to structure with the STAR methodology and some other tips on sharing your experience and proving your experience within the stories. So those are really important. And then come up with the practical responses to the common questions. I mean, anyone can do a Google, inquiry. Most common interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Give us an example of, and there's many, right? Why do you want this position on? I have a slide actually on this. But come up with what your answers would be, but I caution you not to script them out. Some people, I've heard people say, oh, I love phone interviews because, I can script out my answers and then I can really read them and they can't tell. Well, yes, they can, because anytime you're reading something that's written, it's not as extemporaneous as it is otherwise. So I encourage you to come up with bulleted responses, right? 5 years experience, whatever it is, example, and maybe what you did with the keywords, so that you see it and you're studying this beforehand, right? Even when you're traveling to your interview, if you're taking public transportation, eventually, once we go back to those kinds of interviews, you could be looking at and kind of getting yourself in that mind frame for answering those questions. Okay, great. Here we go. Dressing for success, right? Dress for the interview. So there's lots of different graphics that are out there, but what I want to talk to you about is I highly recommend that you dress professionally, right? And obviously for federal government, things like that, that's going to be super professional, with your, your suit or, whatnot. For some nonprofits that are much more informal and they have an informal dress code, it could be that maybe having the full-on matching suit, might be uncomfortable. You might feel uncomfortable, but I would always dress above what their, a step above at least, of what their, what their dress code is. And I personally would default toward the being more dressed up, overdressed versus underdressed, because they're generally not going to negatively, assess you for being overdressed, right? Overly professional, but for being less so, yes, they certainly could. So really take into consideration, you don't want distractions. You want them to be focusing on you, not your jingly earrings, your big earrings, things like that, or your, your lovely, bright nail polish that, jeweled or whatever, you don't want them to be focusing on that. You want them to be focusing on you and the content, what you're saying. So that said, I'm definitely a fan of something that might set you apart. Maybe for a woman, that might be, an accent scarf, or some piece of nice, like a nice necklace that's, not gaudy, but, something that's a centerpiece type of thing. For a guy, it could be, maybe a nice pair of, socks that are, a lot of times, if you want to make a statement more, I mean, they talk about with socks, oftentimes having them match your, and really, subdued and not sticking out. There are other thoughts on, depending on how progressive the organization might be, those could be a little bit of an accent sock, or certainly with your tie. While I wouldn't suggest anything that's super, out there or over the top, something, there's some really nice ties out there that could make that impression. Okay, so great. Well, actually, let me just stop here and just see, what do we have? Ariana, is there anything in the chat box so far on any of the topics that we've talked about already?
Yeah, we've got one question from Kimberly.
Okay.
Which type of interview is usually administered by a government agency?
Yep, great. Thank you. That's a very good question. And the answer is panel. With a federal agency, it is almost always a panel interview, at least initially. So panel interview, generally 3 people is, I would say, the most common, but it may be more depending on the nature of the job and how many different people you may be, interacting with. But yeah.
Okay, and we've got one more real quick before we move on to the dress code. A question from Katrina. Any tips for determining the company's dress code?
Sure, good question, Katrina. One of the things that I would recommend that you do is check out Glassdoor and some of the other online locations, where Glassdoor has a lot of information on organizations, the ratings of organizations from, past employees. They talk about their salaries, so you can get a lot of really good insight. But I always caution people with Glassdoor. I think it's a great resource, but remember, the person who's the most likely to respond to a survey of that nature and tell them, the details, is oftentimes the one that's most emotional, i.e. maybe negatively impacted. So sometimes I think that it can skew it to some degree, responses. But that said, you can get a lot of very valuable information from that. I would also say tap into your contacts. You know, if you know somebody who works there, obviously, or even if you don't know somebody who works there, maybe tap into your, you know, contacts and say, hey, does anyone have any contacts, know of, have experience with, or know anyone who's worked for whatever organization? I'm trying to determine a little more about the specifics of, you know, their you know, the organization, their, you know, culture, things like that. I mean, people are willing to, I think, help. And that said, remember with LinkedIn, and we don't have time to go into this, but just with LinkedIn, you can certainly always use that the search, the people search, and do past company, Peace Corps. Always do that, because Peace Corps, that's going to give you like 20, you know, 200,000, whatever. It's going to give you a lot of hundreds of thousands, whatever people. And then current company, and then whatever that company's name is. And you might find somebody who's an RPCV that would be willing to speak with you as well. So, all right. So great. I'm going to go ahead here and we'll come back to some additional questions if folks have them. Creating the positive impression is really important. Obviously, you want to be very genuine, right, from the get-go, right? Because an employer's impression of you is created largely in the first 7 seconds, right? 7 to 10 seconds. It's very hard to change that first impression. So if you mix up, or you don't exude that warmth, you know, that the smile, the like wanting to be there, excitement about, you know, being a part of this, and, you know, opportunity, you can really fail in that, because it's hard for them to change that, you know, later on, that positive, that impression, that first impression. But so exude warmth, you know, be genuine, listen, right? Listen to the questions. Now, that said, certainly there might be one where maybe it's like a 2-part question, it's really long, so it's hard to remember both. It's okay to ask them to repeat the question if you didn't hear it, but you don't want to do that all the time. And maybe what you do is, you know, you say, I'm sorry, I want to make sure that I respond fully to this question. So maybe you gave kind of a response, and then you realize that there was another part, but you're not sure if you answered it. You could say, I do want to make sure that I've answered your question fully, and I recall it was a 2-part question. Can you let me know if, you know, can you repeat the second part, or something like that? They appreciate that, but just not every question. Okay, let's keep going. We have common interview questions. And as I said, you can look online. I'm going to have some in a resource that'll be linked in the follow-up email that you're going to get after this, which should go out by, this afternoon, actually. So you'll get additional resources and links to common interview questions, you know, different methodologies to answer them, all of that. But by far, your most common interview question is going to be the first one that I have here. The tell us about yourself and why you're interested. Okay. And people hate that question oftentimes because it's such a big one. People always say, how should I, you know, respond to this? And, you know, what you don't want to do is go into your life story. I was born in Minnesota. At the age of 7, I moved to Iowa. And then, I mean, obviously, right? But that said, it's fine as a context. Maybe you are, you know, working that in, you know, maybe you say, I was born and raised in the Midwest. And after completing my undergraduate, I had the opportunity to serve with Peace Corps in where I, whatever, you know, you could certainly do that, but you want to tell them a little bit about yourself, right? Your past. Now, it could be, you could start with maybe a sentence about, you know, I am a program manager with, you know, 3 years of experience in I've, you know, refined my program management skills through my experience with Peace Corps, where you can answer it in many different ways, right? But you don't want to go on very long. Your answer should be pretty succinct, right? So, you know, you're going to have several sentences to that one, and just practice it and kind of write out, you know, like I said, kind of what you want to say, and then practice making it sound really, you know, extemporaneous, that kind of thing. But my big key for that question is you end it with why you're interested in this position. So even if they don't ask and why, you know, even if they don't say, tell us about yourself and why you're interested in this position, you want to end with, you know, you told your, you know, a little bit of your skills, and that's why I'm so interested in this opportunity. It seems a perfect fit for me given my XYZ skills and master's in whatever it is, right? So you end with that enthusiastic, I'm here because I want to be here messaging, right? Not in those exact words. So that is a really important one. Tell us about an accomplishment you're extremely proud of. You know, some people will say, tell us about, you know, they'll ask you, you want to have one, you know, that you can, you can share without sounding conceited, but it's sure, and you can share maybe an experience in your most recent job where, you were, put in a situation where, somebody had left, or they went on maternity leave, and you were asked to fill in for this role that had a major event in 1 month's time. And you talk about how you jumped into it, whatever, and the outcome, right? What was the outcome? What happened? And we're going to talk more about that in just a moment when we talk about the STAR methodology, because these last two questions are more of behavioral questions, right? And that really is where interviewing questions are at. It's not very useful for them to ask yes, no questions, other than on screening types of things. Do you have 3 years of experience in this, or do you have a master's? Yes, but they want to hear the proof of like what, for you to tell them that story. So again, the behavioral questions: tell me about a time you used your intercultural skills to address an issue in the workplace, right? That would be a good one. And I just want to show this graph before I respond to some of these here. So the STAR methodology, I like this way of thinking about how to answer when you're preparing yourself on how to answer these questions. Looking at, well, first you're preparing, you're listening to the question first, right? When they ask it. Now it says, think of an event, right? Plan and organize in 5 to 8 seconds. Now, 5 to 8 seconds is actually a really long time when you're in front of someone and there's no talking. I know, because in our, we work a lot on, when we do these webinars or you're doing in-person trainings, they say 5 to 8 seconds, leave that space without filling it to allow people to really think about and then come up with a question. And it's really hard for many people to do, including myself. That 5 to 8 seconds, it does seem like a very long time. But I say prepare in advance, even these, right? And then come in. And when they ask you that behavioral question, right, think of the situation. So what's the context, right? Where was this? Was it in your Peace Corps service? That's great. You could give a little bit of background, not too much. You don't want to go into, it's very easy to get in the weeds in these examples, but the situation, providing the context, what had happened or what was happening, the task, what was the problem or the challenge that you were, tasked with solving or, right, addressing. What action did you take? That's the A. So explain what you did and how, what you did to solve the problem, what and how you did, right? And then most importantly, and people forget this, what were the results? That's the R. So STAR, situation, task, action, results. And if you think about that with your behavioral questions, those questions where they're asking for not yes or no questions, but rather you to give an example or share your experience, this is going to help you a whole bunch in coming up with effective answers. So that's what I'll say. I'm going back just to this last one here. Tell me about a time you used your intercultural skills or whatever to address an issue in the workplace, right? So for that, you might say, and I'm going to get to prefacing your responses as well. But for the STAR portion of your response, when you're talking about, what you did, it might be, certainly, I have, 3 years of direct experience in, I've refined my intercultural skills in each of the past 3 jobs that I've held. One example would be when I was working in with, you set the context, and then the task. What was the challenge? We were working with various populations, at-risk populations, and from various backgrounds who had this is a perfect one to talk about with your Peace Corps service, right? I mean, tell me, you all have become kind of intercultural experts, if you will, really overcoming those cross-cultural differences to really gain success. Many of you could point to those. So this is a great time to bring those kinds of things out, right? And then the action that you took, right? So, I brought the team together and we designed an action plan with whatever it is, and then the results. And I'm really proud of the results of that, as we were able to we got a 73% response rate with Get those numbers in there when you can, right? So that's what is meaty too. Like when you include numbers and all of that, it's more believable. And you want them to go away thinking, wow, she was or he was really prepared and had good examples. That's what you want them to do. So hopefully that helps there. Does anyone, are there any questions, Ariana, on like STAR methodology or behavioral questions in particular?
No questions on that topic so far. We have one question on, I think probably on a future topic in the presentation.
Sure. Is that the informational interviews to get a good sense, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, we will address that at the end, I promise. So this graphic here, just the tips for answering questions, right? Prefacing your responses, which I was alluding to, and I have a sheet that talks more, or a slide, but prefacing your responses, this is what you do to set the context or the depth of your experience before you go into what they're talking about with the STAR methodology. You know, if they say, give me an example of a time you, and they want that, right? Before you go into, a lot of people would, and they would technically be correct in following the STAR methodology if they said, sure, when I was working in da 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 da, and they go right into that experience, right? But it really helps them if you can set that context or depth of your experience. If you can say something like, you know, sure, I have 5 years of specialized experience in whatever they're asking about. One example would be, and you go into the STAR methodology to answer it. Does that make sense? It allows you to set that context so that they can, and it also, what's great about it is, let's say they don't like the example that you share. If you've prefaced your answer and said, you know, that, you know, I have, you know, so many years of experience, or it's not always I have X years of experience to set that, to preface your response. It might be, you know, my strong intercultural skills have been, you know, strengthened through da 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 da, each of my whatever. So it could be that type of a sentence as well to start with, right? But it really helps. And you know what else is great? It keeps the interviewer grounded and focused, because sometimes, you know, you may worry about losing focus yourself in an interview, right? You're nervous and all of that, but employers can sometimes, you know, go in and out mentally, you know, and so it's nice when you preface your response, it's reminding them of what the topic is too, which is always nice. Quantify, which I just said, that's the key. Quantify when possible. That helps prove it, right? You know, those numbers, and even if it's, you know, some people are like, well, it's not that impressive, you know, on your resume as well. You have the numbers there. It's more believable, right? So share some of the, you know, some of the things that you can share, right? And then, of course, you do want to maintain good eye contact. I talk about the 3 to 5 second eye clasp when, and I talked about that in the beginning a little bit with the panel interview, how I like it because, you know, it gives you that moment in between. But that maintaining pretty good eye contact is important even when it's a virtual event. So it's, again, it's when it's virtual, it's with that camera, wherever your camera is placed on your device. And when it's in person, it's with the person, but not staring dead stare, like never breaking it. It's fine to blink occasionally as well, right? That's important, and that's natural. That can also help you, you know, take off a little bit of that pressure. Okay, great. And then keep your answers succinct. You know, just don't ramble or give too much information, right? You want to keep it focused on what they answered so that it answers it succinctly. They go on to the next question. They see you as somebody who can be proactive and do things and, you know, just have success. So let's go on here again. And I told you I had this slide for you, the prefacing your responses. This is probably my #1 tip that I give to people. So just as I said, and I showed you there, you know, the importance of why it is, and then an example here, it makes a huge difference. And I think if you take away one thing from this session, I hope you take away more than that. But if you take away only one, preface your responses. All right. I want to poll folks, although we're going to have to do it using the chat box, but what has been, in your opinion, what's been your most difficult interview question? What do you think is the hardest interview question to answer? Just drop your responses into the chat box, and then we will try to address some of those as time permits. And I can certainly stay on a little bit at the end and continue if you want to, but I do want to respect folks' time. We're doing okay. We have about 15 minutes left officially. And like I said, I could certainly stay on and answer some of these questions as well. So what do we have coming in here? Let's see. Oh, sorry, somebody wanted me to go back to the, yeah, that's fine. Here's the preface responses one, yeah. And again, you're gonna have access to this, the recording, so you can go back at your leisure too. But hope you can get your screenshot there. Awesome. Okay. So what has been your most difficult interview questions? Do we have, oh yes, good ones come. Oh yeah, of course. The weakness. That is the one that's coming out more than any other one, right? Everyone hates the weakness question, right? Uh, I mean, it's a difficult question because, and there's different ways that people have talked about, responding. Um, have any of you heard of some people in the past, I remember people said, just share a strength and make it into a weakness, oh, I just can't say no, I just want to do and help. I'm just, an overachiever. Like that just, it doesn't, I just don't think those work. Even if you are that, I don't think it goes over well in an interview. I think people roll their eyes, The one that really gets me is perfectionist. I don't want to hear somebody say they're a perfectionist, even if they are, because that one has been overused. It was for years, like it seems, the promoted, like, oh, tell them you're a perfectionist. Who doesn't like a perfectionist? Well, it may be a weakness for you, it's a strength for them. So I would definitely say choose a valid weakness, right? But one that's not directly related to the job that you're going for. If you're, for example, if you're going for a job in it's some kind of finance or something where you're going to be looking at detailed, and analyzing detailed reports, you're not going to want to come back with a weakness. You're not going to want to come in with your weakness being, sometimes attention to detail is difficult for me. I lose some of the, little things. Of course, right? You're not going to say that. So you're going to choose, I always say my recipe for success with this one is to choose a weakness that's not related to the position, right? That is a weakness that you've had that's not related to the position. And then you share what it is, but you couch it in the past and then share what you've done to work on this and how you've made progress. You don't want to say, and now it's no longer an issue, because then they can say, well, great, then tell us about one that is a weakness still. So again, for the weakness, couch yours in the past, talk about what you've done to work on it, and because that shows that you're proactive, that you're somebody who can admit that they have weaknesses. Attention, we all do. And so somebody who's willing to work on that as well. So I think that's the key with the weakness. And I have, you'll see in the resources that I'm sharing in the email that goes out, there is there's some that share specific like samples of how to respond to the specific questions. And we'll go into some more detail if we have time at the end. So great. What are some of the other ones we have? Tell us about a failure. That's similar, right? I mean, come on, we've all failed. So it's important to not say, oh, I've never failed. I've always gotten what I've gone for, right? So share two weaknesses. Yep, that's doubly hard, right? Okay, let's see. Working in a group and it failed. That's a good one. Important not to blame other people, for the success, and make it work. With that one, working in a group and it failed, or that you were struggling. Tell us about a time, for example, you had a challenge in a work team kind of environment. Like you might point to a time where there was a situation. I mean, an example that I remember I used to give was you were working with three colleagues, or somebody who or they were in, maybe it was they were in undergrad, they were in school, and they were on a group project, and it was a team project, and you noticed within the first few meetings that there was one individual who really wasn't really there, wasn't really investing or coming prepared. And so you you called the team meeting and had everyone come together and just ask, hey, how are people doing? What's working? What's not working? How, what's going on for everyone? And that allowed the person to actually share that, their mother had just died, and they were really struggling at this point. And so you were able to restructure the responsibilities to give them a greater role in the actual presentation at the end of the semester, or whatever it is, and do the other three of you took on a little more of the research role, and that was a creative way to solve that issue. So those are the kinds of examples, right, that you can give. So where do you see yourself? Several people have put here with the where do you see yourself in 5 years, or 2 years, all of that, right? Those can be tricky because the shorter time frame that they list, the more of a risk it is. Are they asking if you're going to just be a job skipper, or you're just going to take this job and leave within a year. Sometimes people have aspirations to go to grad school, and they'll say, well, I want to get my master's, and so I plan to go to grad school within 2 years. Well, that can really hurt you, because they might think or assume, oh, great, she's going to leave and go to grad school. What you could do with that is to say, I am looking at some point to, increase my skill set in via a master's degree. And that's why I'm really excited to be here in the DC metro area, where there are so many evening programs for masters that would, could potentially allow me to, continue my, job that I'm passionate about while, working on my own professional development in that arena, something like that. So, okay. Let's see here. And we are, okay, I think what we'll do here, there's some great questions. Why don't we leave the rest of the questions just until the end? We're almost at the end, actually, and then we're going to do the questions that people have. So if you do have additional questions, please throw them in the chat box now, and we will get to as many as we can. So closing the interview, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the importance of that. The interview, like the questions to ask, right? Like at the end, you always want to have questions to ask for the employers. And I generally recommend that you make a list of probably 3 to 5 to have, not that you're going to necessarily ask all of them, but realize that oftentimes many of those questions are going to be answered. And you don't want to be the person that asks a question that's already been answered in the interview, because that gives the impression that you didn't even listen. So, and they might answer some of those. So if you only have 2 questions and they answer both, it's hard to say. I would not encourage you to say, nope, I don't have any questions, because that gives the impression that you don't even care about this job enough to, to do some research and come up with some questions, things like that. Now, if they truly have answered all your questions and you find yourself, not able to come up with some in the moment, you say, wow, I actually had a list. I have a list here of 4 questions, and you've done a great job already of answering those. So at this point, I don't have any additional ones, but should I have some that come up as I reflect on this interview, may I reach out to you? And if so, what would the best contact be? And that's great, because that can let you get their contact information direct, that you can then use in a thank you note, which you're going to do too. Always, I am a huge believer in the thank you note. In fact, thank you notes, if they're not done, they can cost you the job. If you don't take that time, and typically they're, typically they're done via, well now, typically they're done via an email, right? But, and that's fine. And, you just respond to them, thanking them for the time and for sharing more information about the job, reconfirming your interest. The interview, learning more about was, whatever, you reference something that you learned in it, and how, that made you even more excited about this opportunity, and you look forward to hearing, regarding next steps, something like that, right? Now, if you really liked the interview and you want to set yourself apart, you could potentially even do a snail mail type of, your actual old-fashioned type, where you write it on a card and you send it in the mail, right? I recommend, if you're going to do that style, just go out and buy the 10-pack of, you can get these at the dollar store. It's not a lot of money, little thank you notes, and you have them all ready with some stamps so that you can do it timely, because you would want that to be timely. You want it to probably go out that same day, because it's going to take a delay, right? A couple days. And the good thing about that is, they've gotten the instant one that shows that you're timely, you're professional, that you appreciate their time. And then several days later, or sometimes in federal especially, mail can take longer, going through extra screens and all of that, but they get this other, and it's like, wow, they must really want this job. So it can be good. And make it pretty brief, not regurgitating the same exact stuff, right? Okay, but back to the closing the interview here, where I was talking about the questions. You might show them that you've done your research, by saying something like, I noticed in my research, or in my, in some research that I was, doing, your organization recently, and I'm wondering, that shows that you're interested in the company enough to actually do a search. And that can be really impressive, right? You can also research them, the interviewers, like we said earlier, and you can come up with even a question. It's always good. As I was preparing for this interview and who I would be interviewing with, I noticed that you too went to the University of whatever. It's always great to meet a fellow, whatever it is. Those kinds of things can be great, right? I like to ask, what's your projected timeline for filling the position? And what are the next steps in the hiring process? Because that gives me, the interviewee, an idea of how long should this take right, to fill? What is their thoughts? Is this going to be a quick hire or something that's going to be drug out by months, right? And what are the next steps? Will there be a second interview? That's a skill interview. Well, you could start preparing for that in a sense if you know. Things like that. So I think those are good questions to ask. Now, generally, whenever they say, oh, we're looking to move ahead, quickly within the next 2 weeks, I generally say don't worry until you double that amount of time, because oftentimes their idealistic, their desired time frame gets pushed back because of a lot of things. So, and especially now, that might be the case too, right? Depends. What's the most successful transferable skill in your mind, that, that would make a candidate successful, right? That can show you, and when they respond to that, you could even say, oh, wow, that's great. That's actually one of the areas that I feel, strongest in, my ability to, turn on to quickly pivot, as proven by my Peace Corps, experience and evacuation and such. So I'd welcome the chance to step into that. Now, the last one that I have down here that's like, that I want to actually talk a little bit about is, this is my, prefacing your responses is my number one of my top few tips, right? The other one is the concerns question. I personally, if you feel okay about the interview, don't do it if you totally bombed, but if you feel decent, like the interview went okay, you could say, as it's one of your last questions that you would ask, you could ask, now that you've had a chance to review my resume and visit with me in person, or, visit with me virtually about this opportunity, what, if any, concerns do you have about my candidacy? Now, some people are like, what? You would not want to ask that. That's asking about, your week, like what's something that, like asking about something that you don't have, that's going to just, that's going to be bad for you. Well, actually, it's, in my mind, and I have heard different views on this. I did hear somebody recently that said, well, it puts me, the interviewer, on the spot, and I don't like that. Well, of course not. Nobody likes to be put on the spot, but that's a really good experience for an interviewer to have when you are interviewing for a job, because suddenly they're like, right? Like answering this question, like, and so a lot of times they might be like, nothing, you're great. I mean, so if they do that, then you respond, and you always respond to this question. Don't ever ask it if you're not going to respond, and just go, oh, you're going to respond and say, well, great. I'm really excited to hear that. I'm extremely interested in this opportunity, and I'm confident that my XYZ skill set would be well utilized in this capacity. And I look forward to hearing regarding next steps in the hiring process. Great. Now, if they have a concern, if they have a concern and it's something that you actually do have, but maybe you didn't make it abundantly clear in your interview or in the resume, and they say, well, you seem like a good candidate. I didn't see as much reference to whatever, fill in the blank, to monitoring and evaluation, or whatever the thing is, or working in, whatever group settings, whatever it is, you always want to reply. You always want to reply with, you always want to reply with, thank you for your concern. I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I would like to assure you that would not be an issue. I actually do have experience, but I perhaps failed to, include it as comprehensively in my whatever interview or reference it, whatever. You basically, thank you for your concern. I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I'd like to reassure you that wouldn't be an issue. Okay, great. So, and finally, if it is a concern that you don't have, if it is something that you really don't have, you're going to, again, start with, thank you for your concern. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Although I do not have direct experience in skill, whatever, silk screen technology for I have proven my competency using CRM databases and blah, blah, blah. And I'm confident that I could learn this, whatever, skill set or this program quickly through self-study. So you acknowledge what you don't have. You say, you're confident that you could bring it on and bring out something else that might be close here. And I just want to make a note here. I just got a notice that my battery light is low, so it should not go out before we finish here. But I may run and get that while having maybe Ariana in a moment here when we're at the end now for the Q&A. So Ariana, could you spend just a moment looking at additional questions that are here? I want to take any specific questions that you want to ask about how to answer, or questions, on any other part of interviewing. So I'm going to have you moderate that for one moment while I just grab my cord to make sure we can we can stay online. The last thing I want to do is drop off on you unexpectedly. Okay. So
Okay.
Ariana, they're just going to put their chat box questions in, and then I'm going to go, and you're going to help just organize them and feed them to me, and I will answer as many as I can. I'm just going to grab the battery cord because for some reason my battery's draining faster than usual, you know, those technology things. I'll be right back.
Yep, no problem. Yep, so just continue to drop those questions into the chat, and I'll scroll through and make sure that we answer as many as possible.
Okay, and I am here and ready. If there are any specific other questions, we've covered a lot of content, and I know that that can be overwhelming, but hopefully you can go back and review all of what we've shared, any parts that you're interested in reviewing, and ask any questions that you have here. I do have my chat box open as well here, so.
Yeah, so I scrolled back up towards the top to pick up any we may have missed.
Sure.
And there's a good question from Elizabeth. Are there any questions you'd recommend asking in an informational interview to get a good sense of the work culture, opportunities to advance, investment in employees, etc.?
Yeah, I think, right, the informational interview, I think that's a great time to ask about culture and things like that, from somebody who is inside, right? And you can easily do that, you know, by saying, you know, can you speak to me a little more about your experience with, you know, the office culture or the culture of this organization or whatever those kinds of things are. Um, it's hard to ask about salary. Can you tell me about salary? You know, that's a little more, that's a lot more sensitive, I guess. But it definitely is possible to get more of that sense of, you know, kind of the organizational culture. You can also do that from researching online. I mean, I can't tell you how, you know, how much you get through, you know, even just doing, you know, a Google, you know, organizational culture, whatever. Glassdoor, like I was saying earlier, has some information more on like what's their culture, what, you know, that type of thing of many organizations. So so tap into those. I think informational interviews can give you a really good uh, background to know if this is even an organization that's worth pursuing for you. I mean, some organizations are going to be much more uptight, much more conservative, much more whatever, you know, in terms of their structure and things. And so you obviously want to know more about what you want and what you're most comfortable in to make those decisions. So great.
Okay.
Anything else?
A question from Sarah. Is it bad to say I want to become a subject matter expert or become a manager in the field when asked where do you see yourself in 2 to 5 years?
No, I think it's fine to have, you know, the aspirations of, you know, moving up, but you don't want to give the appearance that you're just taking that job that they're interviewing you for, and you're, as soon as the, you know, opportunity comes, you're going to be, you know, hitting the road and leaving that. So I think the important part with that is to probably preface your response by saying something like, you know, I'm really looking for an organization that I can dedicate myself to, you know, sink my teeth into in terms of, you know, what, you know, blah, 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 blah. And that's why I'm so passionate about this organization. It really meets, you know, fits my, you know, XYZ, you know, what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an organization that I can grow with. So at some point, you know, I am eventually looking at, you know, ways that I could perhaps move through the organization into a role, you know, into roles that would best allow me to bring my XYZ skills and make those things. You don't want to say, yeah, in 2 years, I want your job, you know, something like that. Of course, that's more, oh, yeah.
Okay. Another good one. What are your thoughts on nonverbal communication during virtual interviews?
Yeah, nonverbal communication in virtual, it's hard. The virtual, I mean, you see my face here and we're, when we're talking and such, but when you're doing a virtual interview, it's really hard because people aren't looking at each other directly, even though they're looking at the picture of each other oftentimes, you know, they're like looking down and whatever. And so it's hard. I mean, sometimes you can get, the shifting and, that kind of thing, but it's just, you just don't get it as much. And unfortunately, I don't think there's really anything that can be done to make that significantly better where you would get it. But you have to, I think, be extra attuned to those things that you can see maybe. You sometimes, maybe employers, if you're going on too long, you might notice employers are kind of shifting, or they're writing, or they're just kind of, they're a little less focused maybe on you. That would be a hint, I think, oftentimes, or a sign that maybe it's time to, like, wrap it up. So, all right.
We have a few questions about when is the appropriate time to ask about salary.
Yes, very good question. The salary question. And I'm actually going to have a session on specifically like salary negotiation and, knowing your worth and figuring out, that kind of thing. So look for that in the future. It's actually in June, so this next month. But my short answer to that here is, I generally say don't ask about salary. Like, you bring it up. But when they bring it up, they might bring it up and say, in an interview, what are your salary requirements, or what are you looking for in a salary? And I would encourage you to stay broad, not lock into a specific number, because it's very hard to know if you are coming in high or low. You don't want to leave benefit dollars on the table. If they would have paid you, 55,000 and you come in saying 40, or, I mean, you want to, make sure you keep it. So I recommend replying with something similar to what I shared with the cover letter when they asked for, please provide, when they say in a job announcement, please provide a resume and cover letter, including your salary requirements. I would recommend in the interview when they ask that, to respond by saying, I'm looking for a salary that's commensurate with my XYZ skills and master's or whatever specialized experience in, educational experience in blah, blah, blah. That said, I would be happy to provide you with more information or more specifics, or a more specific range, upon learning more about the benefit structure and other, maybe, like, upon learning more about the nature of the position and the responsibilities, and maybe, other things like that, because your salary is dependent on, I mean, they sometimes have other benefits like health insurance, right? Maybe a 401k or some kind of whatever, TSP, whatever it is for nonprofit or federal government. So there's other things just in the salary itself. So again, I would probably do something like, I'm looking for a salary that's commensurate with my skills and experience. I'd be happy to provide more specifics upon learning the projected range. That's the other thing you want to get in there. Be happy to provide more specifics upon learning your projected range and other benefits within the position, right? Some people might, I've heard of people, prefacing it by saying, I'm a very mission-driven person, so I'm not somebody who's going to make my decision on salary alone. That said, I'm looking for a salary that's commensurate with my happy to provide more details upon learning the projected range and other benefits. So I think that's a decent one to include. Okay, anything else?
I know we're running out of time here, but there's a couple of questions about follow-up questions after the interview. So one about, is it appropriate to ask employers about why they chose to invite candidates for interviews? And another question that says, if not selected, is it possible to ask for constructive feedback afterwards?
Yes. Okay. Let me take that second question is great. And I will answer that for the first question that you asked about, is it okay to ask them about why they invited, do you mean other people or you? Like, why did you invite me for an interview? If that's what they mean, I'm not sure I would phrase it like that, because it could almost come across as like, well, why did you invite me for an interview? you might rephrase that to say, you know, what are the specific, you know, transferable skills you're really focused on in the candidates that you've brought to an interview or something like that. But that's the first part. Now that second part of the question, can you repeat that again, Ari?
Sure. If not selected, is it possible to ask for constructive feedback afterwards?
Yes, absolutely. And I call that, I highly recommend that you do what I call thank you for the rejection letter. And I did mention this in one of my other webinars that I did, I think on the application process or whatever. Is absolutely okay to do that. And I think it's very recommended because here's why. So if they get back to you eventually and they say, you know, you haven't been selected, thanks for applying, or thanks but no thanks, whatever it is, right? If you reply via email promptly and you say something like, thank you for letting me know regarding your selection decision for the XYZ position. While disappointed to have not been selected, I wish you the very best in your with your selected candidate. Should opportunities come in the future, please keep me in mind as I remain extremely dedicated to your mission, whatever. You know why that's great? Because many times their first candidate may fall through. It may be that they don't clear a background check. It may be that they change their mind. It may be that they reject the offer. It could be many different things, right? So it could be that they that they just decide it's not the fit for them. But even if it is, and they take that job, when you've put that in there, right? You've said that so professionally, even in the face of rejection, you've maintained your professionalism, and you go back with that. They're left with an excellent impression of you, like, wow, that is really great. What happens if an opportunity comes available a month from now? They may very well think back to you and say, Susie Smith would have been great for this. She was, who knows? So it's never a bad idea to do it. And I think it's a good idea, actually. So thanks for bringing that up. Great. So in looking at the clock here, I just want to acknowledge, because it is 1:13, I guess. It's almost 1:15. We still have almost 40 people who are on. I am willing to certainly stay on for a few more minutes and take some additional questions. That's absolutely fine. But I do want to acknowledge that some folks may need to leave us, and that's absolutely fine. So just a reminder to download the chat box before you do take off, and know that you'll get the follow-up email that'll have additional information. So how many more questions do we have in the box here, Ari? Are there a lot more still, or?
We've come to the end of all the current questions. There may be some back up towards the top. So folks on the call, if you asked a question toward the top of the chat and it hasn't been answered yet, please send that again in the chat box so we can see it and respond to it.
We are not ignoring you intentionally.
And with any other new questions you may have, please feel free to send those as well.
Great. I think what I'll do is, and again, I will stay on after this, but why don't we go ahead, Ari, why don't we go ahead and we can, in a moment here, we'll stop the recording. And then we will continue to answer some questions. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to at least turn off the recording and certainly stay online if there are additional questions, but look for the message from us that will come. And thank you so much for spending some of your Friday with us. And we hope that you have a great weekend.